Hello and welcome to this Power 50 webinar. My name is Polly Jean Harrison and today we are going to be talking all about Regtech. So regulation and fintech go hand in hand, and for both sectors it is a constantly changing landscape. With monitoring and reporting being ever more crucial to businesses out there, the Regtech industry has evolved in a big way over the past few years. This webinar is going to examine the current Regtech landscape as well as what's currently exciting leaders within the space, and with the help of our panelists, we are going to determine what's next for Regtech and how the industry will get there. So I am thrilled today to welcome two fantastic panelists to this conversation. We have Eduardo Diaz, CCO at Uniteller, and Kevin McGuinness, Global Head of Client Solutions at Napier AI. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to have you here to join the discussion on what is a really interesting topic, as I'm sure we will get into. But before we start, it would be great if you guys could give us just a quick introduction, both to yourselves and your companies and the kind of things that you do. So Kevin, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, thanks a million, Polly. Great to be invited, and thank you for the warm welcome. So yes, my name is Kevin McGuinness. I'm the Global Head of Client Solutions at Napier AI. Napier AI are an AML monitoring and screening solution that supports all different participants across the industry, from client name screening for sanctions, PEPs, adverse media. We've a really sophisticated tool set for AML transaction monitoring, as well as payment filtering and payment screening. And we also do client risk assessment methodologies and modeling as well, integrated workflows, full transparency, and reporting to all of the global regulators. So yeah, busy time to be at Napier.
Amazing stuff. Well, as I said, it's fantastic to have you here. And of course, Eduardo, thank you so much for joining. If you could give us an introduction as well.
Sure. Thank you, Polly. Thank you for having me. My name is Eduardo Diaz. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer and Chief Legal Officer for Uniteller. Uniteller, we're a global payments company, and so we help individuals send individuals and companies send money all over the world. We've been in business for 30 years now, and excited to talk to you and to Kevin about the ever evolving RegTech landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely a landscape that is constantly changing all the time. So I guess a really good place for us to start is, what does the current landscape look like? What are we seeing at the moment within the ecosystem? What's happening right now? So, I mean, Eduardo, I'll go back to you for that one first.
Well, I think that what we're seeing, I'll take this question in a different way. What we're seeing is that every day, every year, we have regulations that are changing. We have regulators that are getting more and more aggressive. And oftentimes you're constrained in as a sort of, when you're talking about, from my perspective, so you're in-house, you're managing a large compliance team, but even though you have resources that help you, like individuals or employees, because regulators and regulations are getting more strict, you it essentially it pushes you toward finding technical or software solutions, reg tech solutions that can help you leverage the team that you have to comply with what regulators are looking for. So the landscape is one where, in terms of the regulatory landscape, is one that is more aggressive, more strict, more regulation. And that's why companies like Kevin's are, I'm sure, out there helping customers or clients like ours, or companies like ours, to really to manage that landscape or that environment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. I mean, Kevin, and that's a lovely segue to bring you into this. So what do you think the current landscape looks like, and do you echo any of Eduardo's thoughts as well?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. And in many regards, I think being part of RegTech or being an industry leader in RegTech at the moment has never been more exciting. And I think it's because of companies like Eduardo's, and the fintechs and the payment service providers coming through. They've got a tech first approach to how they deliver their own business for their own counterparts, customers, and clients. And therefore, what we are finding is that these tech-first companies really like working with Napier and other Regtechs because they have no desire to build internally. They don't want to build additional technology for compliance. So they see us as being a good partner. And therefore, we give them the output, the functionality, and the coverage that they so need to meet some of those pressing and ever more challenging, complex regulatory demands that aren't going to go away. But when you take what the folks in the payment service providers and the fintechs are doing, it means then that the more traditional institutional banks, they too now need to keep up, or inevitably they may get left behind. So it's an interesting balance at Regtech at the moment, whereby we've got fintechs who are going hand in glove with Regtechs, where we get the traditional banking and financial services customers who are coming and saying, hey, we need to keep up as well. What can you help us achieve? So I think that ecosystem that we're driving continuously across fintech, regtech, and traditional FI, it's all being demanded by the regulator, and it isn't going to go away.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. I think it's such a really interesting sector of the fintech industry looking at regulation. And I know that there has been some huge changes over the last year or so in terms of the new regulation coming in, changes to different regulations. It would be great to understand, I guess, some of the key regulatory changes from both of your perspectives that you've seen and how they're kind of helping to drive the industry forward, I guess. So Kevin, I'll come back to you for that one.
Yeah, look, I mean, this past 12 months, if we take that snapshot, in our world primarily, across many different sectors, not just in financial services, but in insurance and gaming, has largely been driven by the war in Ukraine and the sanctions that have ultimately been imposed upon Russia. And we see different requirements coming out of different jurisdictions inevitably. So we're finding in North America, there was always some level of provision in terms of doing business with Russia. So their focus right now is on payment filtering and payment screening and making sure that any transactions coming in by people related or entities related to Russia, that they're not going to be exposed to any of the sanctions rules. If we go into Canada, the Canadian insurance business at the moment is very concerned about the distribution of life assurance. Whilst all of their customers remain Canadian citizens, they want to make sure that the recipients of a payout of a fund isn't going again to a sanctioned individual or a sanctioned entity. So all of this continues to drive complexity, and the regulators, particularly in North America, are having a non-negotiable approach to making sure that all participants satisfy what is this challenging landscape. And even in the UK and Ireland, when we're supporting some of our customers with sanction screening, some of the trading clients that we would support right now are very concerned about the use of vessels and making sure that some vessels that would be owned and under Russian ownership aren't necessarily moving product from one port to another, and that they may be either lending in or facilitating the trades. So what we're having to do is use the existing technology to provide hot lists and terms whereby we can pick up the activity and fundamentally then give those institutions the confidence to go back to the regulator and remain compliant. But the Russian sanctions has been the biggest one that we've helped the industry so far this year.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. I mean, Eduardo, what have you seen? What are some of the key regulations over the past year that have come in, particularly that you've found to be industry, I guess, driving the industry forward in the best way?
What we're seeing is a really a push for compliance with standard cybersecurity rules or cybersecurity regulations. We're regulated in every state of the United States, and also we have licenses in other countries. I'll get to other countries in a second. In the U.S., the two main regulators who are pushing are California and New York. New York actually recently um, released an amendment to their cybersecurity rules. And again, what regulators are looking for is they're looking to make sure that companies like ours who handle customer data, to make sure that we are set up in such a way so that our data secure, that we're complying with industry standards. Um, in general, so like there's cybersecurity is one sort of aspect or angle. The other angle is just generally it's data privacy. So over the last 5 to 10 years in different jurisdictions, Europe, now in the US, but also certainly Latin America, um, regulators have been pushing for a more carefully tailored approach when companies like ours touch customer data. And so it's having to comply with all of those additional regulations that makes it challenging, but also exciting. And that's why companies like Kevin's, I'm sure, can sort of help and sort of step in to offer interesting and dynamic services or products.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I think, that's a really interesting take from both of you. And I guess thinking about then the dynamic services and products, Eduardo, that you just mentioned, what are some of the innovations that are exciting you in this space? Are there any particular products and services that you've seen that you think, wow, those are really interesting, really cool, are going to have a lot of, impact on the industry? I mean, Eduardo, is there anything like that that you've seen at the moment?
I've been following what's happening kind of like in the blockchain space and how blockchain could potentially be used for identification of individuals. The blockchain has a number of different attributes or aspects that can really be, I think, a game changer in terms of identification. But I think we're really at the beginning, early phases of understanding how blockchain can we can work with blockchain to better either identify customers or to keep customer information safe.
Yeah, fantastic. And how about you, Kevin? What's exciting you right now? Anything particular that's come through in the space that you're looking at and wanting to keep a close eye on?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually yesterday at an event in Frankfurt in Germany, where I was sat in a round table with a number of like industry watchdogs. We had ex-law enforcement. Some of the big banks were in the room. And don't quote me on this, but largely speaking, the view from the room was that the KYC conundrum has been cracked. And a big focus now for most of the banks and most of the regulators is around transaction monitoring and how they can ensure who a customer who's been introduced to a platform, whether it be Eduardo in the payment service space or whether it be an institutional bank, that they're behaving and conducting themselves as they need to. We've been involved in a number of initiatives with the FCA in the United Kingdom, whereby we're bringing in our sandbox and allowing the regulator to get hands on with some of the thresholds and understanding what risk appetite may be exceeded and what the permutations may be thereafter if an institution doesn't necessarily meet those expectations. And I just think, given the complexity and the volume and the scale, and it's not getting any easier for institutions, whether you be a fintech or whether you be a bank or whether you be an insurance firm, I think that the ability to get in and work with the regulator to stress test these sandboxes and know where the true risk sits within your infrastructure or within your wider marketplace can only be a really good thing. And I just think transaction monitoring, ongoing control, and ensuring that customers who have been introduced to your institution are behaving as they were intended. And it's interesting, we've actually just gone to market with the Napier AI AML index report, and we're receiving a large amount of feedback from our own customer base and wider market participants that they too have a real focus on transaction monitoring, ensuring then that you can bring in automation, efficiency, but essentially at the back end to ensure that the confidence to report to your regulator remains consistent. So innovation around transaction monitoring is going to be prevalent over the coming years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, Kevin. And I guess, obviously we've spoken already quite a lot about sort of the past couple of years and the current situation now in the landscape. So let's move into the future and kind of look at what's next. What do you think is going to be next on the agenda when it comes to regulatory scrutiny in the fintech world? Is there something that you think really needs to be there in terms of regulation, or, I guess what's on the horizon is what I'm trying to ask. So, Kevin, what do you think on that one?
Yes, it's a pretty varied and long list, if the truth be told. What we're finding at the moment is the new DORA initiative around digital operational resilience is picking up pace. And we're finding that a lot of our existing customer base are coming to Napier and asking whether or not our technology and our ability to reduce false positives and our ability to be cloud native and SaaS first will give them what they need in order to satisfy the requirements underneath that operational resilience. On the other side of that, what we're finding is new participants who are coming to the market who've maybe been using different vendors and solutions and in-house builds for a long time. That's a key requirement that they're considering now before they decide to purchase. If we buy a technology, will it make us more efficient? Will we be reducing false positives? Can we make it more effective in terms of our bandwidth, our infrastructure, our data management? So long are the days whereby you just had to understand if you were buying a vendor or partnering with a vendor, were you going to get regulatory compliance? As it stands at the moment, you also need to make sure that your business model remains nimble and operationally effective. And our existing clients are coming and asking for that support. And we're also seeing that new participants from the market coming through have that as a key criteria before they decide who they're going to partner with across the Regtech landscape.
Yeah, fantastic. And then, Eduardo, what do you think? What's next on the agenda for regulatory scrutiny?
I think that we're going to see in the U.S. a push toward data privacy and how data is managed by companies. Uh, Europe has had GDPR for quite some time. The U.S. the data privacy laws are not uniform, and so you have states like California who are coming out or have just come out with um, a whole host of regulations in and around data privacy. And I think that you're going to find that companies like ours and other fintechs are going to need to pretty quickly adopt either new practices, different practices that allow them to comply with the new data privacy laws that will be coming out over the next number of years. I think that I'm not sure that I think you might see a federal or a standard data privacy laws in the U.S., but I'm not sure that it'll be right away. But I think that that's where most countries are going, and I think that most countries will copy the GDPR model.
That's a really interesting view. Thank you, Eduardo. And I guess it's such a vast industry, but it'd be really interesting to know what you guys think the biggest problems regulators currently face. Like we've been saying, lots of new regulation coming in, lots of new regulation on the horizon. How can these regulators kind of keep track of everything? And then how do those challenges trickle down to regtechs as well? Like how does that make a difference there? I mean, Eduardo, I'll ask you that one first.
I think because I work with regulators almost on a daily basis, and I think that for the most part, regulators are they have they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to make sure that industry is not only following the law but also thinking about um, the customer, thinking about the customer experience, thinking about how to protect the customer. But I think that what's happened is, you know, not only has regulation exploded, but also like technology and the product services have also exploded. And so what you find is that sometimes regulators, it's always a kind of a challenge. I wouldn't say challenge, but it's a good challenge that you have to work with regulators to educate them on what exactly the products and services that you're offering are, and how sometimes those products and services, how they fit within the current regulatory landscape or framework, or how they fit within the legal framework. And so it's exciting because I guess the point that I'm making is that products and services in the law has changed so quickly that regulators sometimes are behind the curve or are behind the eight ball. And so oftentimes what we have to do is we have to be creative in how we explain the new products and services that we have, but then also work with the regulator and with companies like Kevin's to address whatever concerns the regulator might have through either additional staffing or leveraging technology to meet the requirements the regulators have for the new products that you're offering.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Eduardo. Thank you. Kevin, what do you think on this? Where do you stand in kind of what the biggest problems currently facing the regulators are?
I think Eduardo summed it up quite nicely there. Look, this who would be a regulator realistically? If it's difficult for us, I can only imagine the amount of sleep they must lose. Because it's multi-industry. It's not just what we do in payment service providing. It's not just what you do in banking. It's so vast with regards to what they need to regulate. And if you think about then how different regulators believe they're doing the right thing, and I know last year there was a real focus on digital assets and crypto and really getting a handle on what was actually going on in that world and should it actually be regulated. And they brought out the travel rule, which was, something that they believed would drive some level of transparency around the originator, the beneficiary. So it's stuff that, we've been doing in traditional markets for an awful long time. But the way in which different regulators have enforced that rule, so you've got Singapore who have locked it in and no digital assets are completing under their jurisdiction without end-to-end coverage. But then you go to other jurisdictions, and I'll not mention any regulators, but they haven't kept up. So you've got different parts of the globe and different parts of the industry that is fully executing the regulations through the law, and others who are playing catch up. So in the middle of that, and this goes back to Eduardo's point, there's a customer in the mix here in all of this. There's typically a societal impact, largely speaking, in all of this. So I think for regulators then to go blanket and ensure that they're doing best for what they believe their part of the industry and their part of society needs, I just think it's a very thankless task to try and enforce at the same time. The other question then is, if Singapore continue to be leading the way and continue to drive best practice, and next door in another part of the world they're not, does that mean that their participants no longer trade with the rest of the industry? So these are all considerations that Regtech will need to configure, because ultimately these regulators are coming to participants and saying, we need technology to track the payments, to make sure that the originator is consistent. They do have blockchain. I mean, that's the one thing they have. So it's completely transparent with regards to what the trade was executed. It's more around then who sat behind it, who is the owner of the trade, and who ultimately then is going to be the beneficiary. So I just think in terms of regulators, it's who goes first, who sets the standard, and then whether or not the global regulators can meet the same expectation.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. And that kind of leads me very nicely sort of into my last question, because we are running out of time today, unfortunately. But Kevin, I'd love to know what you think in terms of how the UK competes in the global regulatory landscape. Do you think we're up there with the rest of the world, or are we lagging behind anywhere? I'd love to know what you think about that.
Oh, I'm a huge advocate for the FCA and the United Kingdom. Look, I think there's a reason fintechs and emerging businesses typically try and kick off in the United Kingdom, because they have a progressive regulator who have a relatively open door policy. They're trying to drive transparency. I had referenced earlier the Sandbox initiative that Napier has taken part in. That's purely because they want more participants to come into the UK market, to thrive, to grow, to provide services. And if you think of the Revoluts, the Starling banks, and all of these neo banks that have emerged from the United Kingdom, that, in my view, is only possible when you have a regulator who's prepared to work both ways. I'm actually due to go to Melbourne in a couple of weeks to sit down with some participants in Australia, and they too are looking to understand what did the FCA do to try and drive these initiatives. How can they try and influence what would be their own industry to ensure that they remain up to speed with other parts of the world? So I don't think the UK and the FCA are behind. In fact, I think in many regards, not always perfect, and nobody is, but I do think they've got a very progressive approach to ensuring that the industry can continue to grow and flourish.
Amazing, thank you. And then Eduardo, a similar question for you, but since you're in the US, perhaps you'd like to look at it from the US standpoint, and how you think the US competes in the global regulatory landscape in terms of the rest of the world as well.
I think that the U.S. For many years has set the standard in terms of KYC and laws like um, the Patriot Act, and just trying to set the standard. I think that recently other countries have kind of taken the lead in terms of regulating blockchain and other yeah, other products and services. I, I think Kevin's point was a really fascinating one. It's this idea of, and it's kind of what your question is getting to. It's how do you as a company, or even as as a company, how do you, when you have a global footprint, how do you navigate the not only ever changing regulatory landscape, but also the different regulatory landscape, right? I'm not going to mention exact countries, but there are some countries in Latin America where regulations are not where other countries are, and then you have countries like Singapore where the regulations are much more strict, and so it's challenging, and then even within countries like the US, certain aspects of certain products and services are heavily regulated. Others, the regulation is somewhere I would say lacking, and so it becomes challenging. It becomes it's not a challenge that it's like that's insurmountable. I think it makes our job um, dynamic and fluid and exciting. But it's also, it can make your job nerve wracking. And so that's where I think that the real opportunity for a Regtech to offer either, I guess no solution is complete, but to the extent that a Regtech could offer solutions to companies that give compliance officers like me peace of mind. That's really where I think the value add is, right? It's how do we create systems and processes so that I'm not taken by surprise, or put differently, how do you create an integrated network of rules that comply with different jurisdictions all at the same time. It's a challenge. It's certainly ever changing, but it makes our job fun.
Fantastic. And what a great place to end the webinar on, as unfortunately we have run out of time today. But thank you so much, Kevin and Eduardo, for your fascinating answers
Thank
and
you.
the great
Absolutely.
conversation. Just a very quick note to our online audience. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to carry on the conversation, make sure you head over to Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, and use the event hashtag hashtag FP50 Regtech 2024. You can follow us over there, or if you want to learn any more about the Power 50, you can head on over to our website, thefintechpower50.com. But Kevin, Eduardo, again, thank you so much for joining me. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and hopefully we will see you again very soon in another webinar or recording or whatever it is that we do. So thanks so much again for joining.
You're
Thank you
very
so
welcome.
much. Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank you.
Polly. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Eduardo.